What's up everybody, Greg here with Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K G2. Now I just finished up shooting with this. We had a festival over the weekend and I got a ton of hands-on with this and really testing it out and putting it through its paces. So in this video, I'm going to go over what's new with the G2 versus the G1, which is what I have right here. And then I'm also going to talk about the ergonomics and some of the software features, some of the things that are really cool and some of the things that you just want to know before you start shooting with it. So let's get right into it, starting with what's new with the G2 over the version 1. Now, as far as the body is concerned, they're almost exactly the same in size. They both weigh about 5 pounds body alone. Once you start adding on the extra things like the EVF and the side grip, the shoulder mount, it starts to add up a little bit more. I think with the EVF and the hand grip, it's about 8 pounds and then a couple more once you add that shoulder mount and a battery and a lens and all of that. The physical dimensions of the camera is exactly the same as well. It's about 8 inches long, 6 inches tall, and about 5 inches deep or wide. Now, most of the new things that you're going to find are actually internals of this camera. One of the big ones is the all-new sensor, which I've been getting a little bit of comments about that it is not a new sensor, but I'm going to stick with what Blackmagic is saying, that it is an all-new sensor. And with that comes some redesigned electronics inside to help that sensor process images better. One of them is being a native ISO of 3200 now, as well as having a new color science, the Color Science 4, and having Blackmagic RAW built into the camera so you don't have to upgrade it with a firmware. That new processing and electronics also allows this camera to do up to 120 frames a second in 4.6K, and you can do up to 300 frames a second in full HD. With the new version, they've also updated the USB-C port to allow you to record out to a mini SSD, which is going to give you more recording options along with the dual SD card slots as well as the CFast 2.0. So just another option to record out Blackmagic RAW through that USB-C port. Now getting to some of my thoughts and things that I've found while shooting with this camera pretty extensively over the past week. Now these aren't in any specific order, they're just kind of random thoughts, so I'm going to lay them out for you here. The first one is going to be the eye cup comes off super easy. I found myself putting the camera down by my side and getting through a crowd and my leg would just pop this thing off all the time, which would be fine if you could pop it back on, but it's pretty difficult to get on and you actually need both hands. Now it doesn't take too long, maybe 10-15 seconds, but if you're in the heat of an event and you need to get up and get shooting, that's not something you want to have to deal with. So having something that would be a little more secure to hold that eye cup on there a little bit stronger. The next thing was using the XLR inputs. Now we had to mount up a microphone, an XLR mic, and we were able to do 48 volt phantom power through the XLR inputs, which is super great, but there's really no good way to mount a microphone on this for that sort of dock style shooting. With like the Sony FS5 and FS7, you get that microphone mount as well as with like the C100, C300, C200. So that's something I would have liked to see implemented in possibly a new version or having an accessory that helps mount that on there. You do have a couple quarter 20s that you could mount some sort of arm off of, but again, it's no slot for a shotgun mic. Going on with the XLR inputs, you also get some really nice audio functionality of being able to adjust different levels and have one be an XLR input, one be the internal mic, instead of limiting it to, oh, you have to use the XLRs or you have to use the internal mics. You can set that up in camera and you can also adjust multiple levels if you wanted to have different like limiters. You can have one up higher and one down lower for different scenes, and then you can cut between them or mix them together in post. The next thing is the physical size of this camera. Now, I never actually tried this to set it up on a Movi, but it is a little bit long, especially once you add a battery on the back as well as a lens on the front. Now, I'm sure you could do it if you completely strip this down and you use a smaller pancake lens, but just keep that in mind that it's going to be a little bit harder to balance on any sort of gimbal like a Movi or a Ronin. Now, since we weren't using this camera on a gimbal, we did have to have some way that we were going to operate it, whether that was going to be handheld or shoulder mount. And we opted for the Blackmagic shoulder mount, which to say the least was a little bit frustrating. Now, operating the actual adjustment of the arm isn't too bad. It can go pretty quickly and just tighten it back down. The one thing that is really difficult to adjust is the hand grip. And this goes if you're just doing handheld as well. On the side of this, you just have a little thumb screw that you have to undo, and that's how you completely tighten it down. So being able to open and close this quickly is not super efficient for doing live events, especially trying to adjust quick on your hand. So I would highly recommend going with a different shoulder mount if you plan on doing some sort of live event where you need to have that quick action. Another thing that was a little bit difficult about using this camera was we were shooting at night, so it was really dark out and we weren't able to see any of the buttons because none of them have light up LEDs, so you can't really tell where stuff is except for by feel. We were shooting by strobe lights and stuff like that was on stage, and it made it really difficult to navigate through the menus and open it up and find the buttons that you needed to without having those LEDs or those backlighting on each of the buttons. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be shooting at night. You really want to get familiar with this camera so you can find the buttons without having to think about it. The last thing that I really have a problem with the use of this camera was the touchscreen. It felt a little bit unresponsive while we were shooting, especially for starting and stopping recording. There were multiple times where I'd hit it, it didn't look like anything happened, so I'd hit it again, and then it would start and stop recording multiple times. So I would just pay attention to that, and if you can, use the actual physical buttons rather than the touchscreen for your recording. Now going away from the ergonomics of the camera and jumping into some of the software and usability on that side, there's a couple things that I want you to know about. The first one is the LCD screen is not super bright. You're definitely going to want to use the EVF or have a separate high bright monitor if you're going to be shooting outside during the day. If it's at night or you're in a studio, you're going to have no problems with the LCD, so just keep in mind when and where you're going to be shooting. Now going from the LCD screen up to the viewfinder, which is really nice to use outside, it also has some really nice buttons on the top for functionality like your zoom, display, and peaking, and you can also customize those buttons. The one thing I didn't like about the viewfinder is that the focus peaking overlay overlaid it over all of the text as well, so all of your on-screen displays, and actually completely highlights the circle that is your record start stop indicator. So it's really hard to tell, especially with the focus peaking being red, if you're actually recording or not recording while you're looking through the viewfinder. I had a couple times while I was backstage shooting some stuff, looking through the viewfinder, looked like I was recording because it was highlighted red using the focus peaking, but I actually wasn't. So I went to start recording and I actually stopped the recording. And then I went to stop the recording and I started recording again. So I got a bunch of footage of just panning around, looking at random stuff as I was walking around backstage. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be using the EVF, that is something you need to keep an eye on, and you need to really look for the time code to be rolling in record run. One of the things I really liked about this camera, and I think was pretty much essential on our shoot, was the built-in presets and being able to save a ton of them in there. We had stuff from 4K 60, 4K 24, we had 300 frames a second, 120 frames a second, and we had all of our settings set up, so all we had to go is into the preset window, hit our preset, and then hit the checkbox, and it will flip right over to that with all of the settings that we needed. And it was a must-have for our workflow, especially shooting live event stuff. Being able to jump between those frame rates was super handy. Talking more about the frame rates, since we were jumping between them so much, you do have to keep in mind that there is a very large crop when you punch into HD. It's a little bit more than 2 times zoom in, which actually came in handy shooting a lot of these shots because we could throw on an 18-35, and now we have the 18-35 shooting the full sensor at 4.6K, and then we could switch into HD if we wanted to get a little extra length and have basically a 30-76 or something in that range. Now the last thing I want to talk about is the Blackmagic RAW format, and there's a couple things that I want to mention. The first one is the file size using the Blackmagic RAW. Now you have a couple different compression ratios, but using a 5:1, shooting the 4.6K at 24 frames a second, you get about 23 minutes on a 128 gigabyte card. Now it's even less than that if you go to the 3:1, and more than that if you go to the 8:1, and I'll make sure to put all of those in the description down below if you want to see that sort of laid out in a chart. The other thing with this Blackmagic RAW is that you can't natively work with it in Premiere. You can only work with it in DaVinci Resolve, which is Blackmagic's software. Now there is a workaround for this. There's a plugin by Autochroma who has a BRAW Studio plugin that allows you to take Blackmagic RAW and work with it natively in Premiere. Now this isn't a free plugin, it does cost about $30 for a license, and I'm going to leave a link to it in the description below, but I highly recommend using it. You still get to access all of your metadata, you can change your ISO, your exposure, your color science, all of that, just like you can in DaVinci Resolve, but now you can do it in Premiere. So I would highly recommend checking that out if you're a Premiere editor. So those are basically my thoughts on the Blackmagic Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K G2. Now I know most of these are sort of negative topics or downsides of this camera, but there's also a ton of upsides. You have amazing frame rates, you have great color science, you have a great price. For $6,000 you're getting a ton of a camera. You also have the Blackmagic RAW, which you can use in Premiere now. You do have to use the plugin, but you get a ton of flexibility in post. And overall, it's a really great camera that I had a ton of fun playing with and shooting around, and I look forward to shooting with it more in the future. If you want to try this camera out, there's going to be links in the description down below, so definitely go check those out. Also, if you want some more information. If you have any questions about the G2, make sure to leave those down in the comments below. And if you want to see more videos sort of with my thoughts on different cameras after I've shot with them, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for new videos every single week, and I'll see you in the next one.